Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic, examining esoterica. Hey, today Jacob Fluharty is back with me, my intrepid friend Jacob Fluharty, who will get a text from me where I am proposing that we talk about incredibly weighty, sometimes philosophical subjects, and he'll be like, yeah, sure, I'm there. So he is here with me today. We're going to be talking about the concept of inner dichotomy, but not the external dichotomy, internal dichotomy that is part of a philosophical belief system. It is the idea of duality within us, within others, the idea that more than one thing can be true at once and almost always is in most situations, which is something a lot of people struggle with in gaining spiritual perspective that leads to greater growth, that leads to healing. And there is a lot of worth in learning how to understand how something can feel one way to you and to be absolutely something to someone else, and that both things are true, like they're not canceling each other out. So we're going to be diving into that just a little bit in depth and how we make peace with it and how we work with it. But before I get started, let's get the housekeeping out of the way because that's always a helpful thing. Hey, I've been promising to mention this site ever since they put me on the list of I was like #2 on their top 10 podcasts for esoterica and a couple of other things. It's FeedSpot. If you are looking for a curated site to give you lists based on interest, so it will have things about esoteric podcasts. It will also list other types of interests. There's going to be a link in the description box, both on the video version and then in the show notes on the audio version. Go check out FeedSpot. I've been having a back and forth with the people who run it. They're really nice people, and they can help you with finding the things that will fit your interests the most. And this is not a paid promotion. It's just something that I said I would do, so I'm doing it. And you can find me, I'm Alane, at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. That is the only way to book me. There is my YouTube channel, Cronecast at the Rising Moon. And of course, you can always find me here on Logical Magic, examining esoterica. And I have begun a Patreon for daily spiritual guidance and healing readings. It's got some guided meditations. It's got some healing energy to help boost the magic that you may or may not be doing, including manifestation. Then you can find Jacob at Southern Style Readings on Facebook, or you can find him at southernstylereadings@gmail.com. He's a great reader. He's a great friend. He's a good guy. Let's get talking about today's subject. Okay, so the idea of trying to understand, because people get really tripped up with the idea of our inner dichotomy, meaning that like we can be these really, really good people and then sometimes have these like really icky, manipulative or nasty or dark thoughts, and how that doesn't negate the good part. That's just part of the baggage that comes along with being a person, that it serves a different psychological function, that it is just another part of you, and that it is, if something that you are in control of, then it can help you understand yourself better. But it's not something to be greeted with guilt or shame, because it is simply a natural part of being a person. And every person that you know, that you think of as being like this really good person, please remember that throughout history, really good people have been convinced to do terrible things because we all have within us, like, the monster in our basement, the one that tells us we want power and that, whoever we might be hurting might deserve it, or it's a victimless crime, or any of the other things that we do. I'm going to use like a really simple example for a moment, which is veganism, which is great. Like, for real, people for the ethical treatment of animals, I'm really down with that. Let's not hurt anything that we don't have to. By the same token, whenever we go to the grocery store and buy any form of produce or any form, there's suffering involved. If you knew the lives of migrant farm workers, you would know that there is almost no way to consume a product that has been brought to us in a mass capacity without participating in the suffering of a feeling being on some level. And so that, like, whereas people might inhabit the vegan space and think that they are contributing less to suffering unless they're growing all their own food in an off-the-grid capacity, they're contributing to suffering because there's almost no way in this world not to. And that's one of the areas where we have to make peace with the idea of dichotomy, meaning that you can be doing your best. You can be somebody who's really invested in, I do no harm. I walk forth with an open heart and an open hand, and I'm trying to inhabit my highest self and be in alignment with my highest self. And you still have to make peace with the idea that I'm contributing to the ways this world sucks because I have no other choice in some capacities, and because we all have to make bargains within our heads. And again, the easiest way to think of it is that, migrant farm workers live in absolutely medieval conditions. And pretty much all of us have to, in order to be fed, consume products from a very, suffering-filled industry. And so that's one example in the external world. And then in the internal world, the easiest example to reach for is grief, and how it is a multi-layered thing. And this is where the more than one thing can be true at once and they're all equally valid comes into play. Grief is not just about longing and sadness and mourning and missing. Grief can be about anger. Why did this happen? How could you leave me alone? Why weren't you taking better care of yourself? It can also be about relief, where people have been engaged in long-term caretaking and they feel terrible guilt over there's a part of me that's so glad. And I'm going to use myself as an example because it's the easiest way for nobody else to get in trouble. My dog Puddles died a few days before Christmas, and I had her for 15 years. She was the sweetest soul. I loved her so very, very much. But she was in a decline for the last year and a half. In all truth, I should have had her put down 6 months before I did. But I was having trouble with it. I wasn't sure how my dog Oscar would react, among other things. He, by the way, is happy as can be. Apparently he feels very liberated and freed, and now he's the center of attention. But it really screwed me up in the aftermath, because I originally got Oscar thinking that when my dog Puddles goes, I'm going to be so destroyed. If I don't have another dog there, I don't know how functional I'll be. And in reality, I was super relieved in the days that followed, because her health had really been failing. Her mobility had been failing. She had been having trouble with forms of incontinence. She still seemed to have some quality of life, which is another part of the reason that I didn't put her down. And that was something that really messed with my head a little bit, was that it took about 3 weeks for me to really sit down and be sad and cry and mourn and grieve. Because initially it was a feeling of, oh my goodness, I can leave the house for more than 3 hours at a time, because I couldn't for close to 2 years. And so I really felt of course, was that partially a choice to make sure that she was taken care of? Of course it was, but it was still very confining. And so it messed with my head a little bit to understand that the fact that my primary emotion upon leaving her was a little bit, losing her, was a little bit oh wow, oh my God, I can sleep. She's not constantly, she was beginning to show some stages of dementia. My world became much more peaceful and much more relaxed almost immediately. And instead of being heartbroken, it genuinely was like setting down a bit of a burden. Then 3 weeks later, right on cue to actually start missing her outside of the ways in which, that energy was really consuming my whole life, absolutely grief-stricken, sobbed and cried, wished I could have her back. And that's an example of what the inner dichotomy and the external dichotomy that we're talking about in this episode are about. Because we can confuse ourselves if we can't make peace with the idea that that is perfectly normal. We are meant to have layers. We are meant to have things that coexist. Jacob, what's been your experience with this? We talk a little bit about this because one of your favorite sayings is the same as mine, which is more than one thing can be true at once. So I know that you're already on board with it, but do you know what I'm talking about? Do you have examples in your own life?
I can't think of any specific examples right off the top of my head, but yeah, I do like to say that all the time, because especially when you have to look at a person and kind of understand their motives, or who they are as a person. You can see different aspects of who they are, and one group they may act this way, and another group they may be this way. And so understanding that we are multifaceted creatures, and not everything is going to be true all the time, helps with, kind of finding that middle ground and relating to each other as well.
And boy, that's a really good example, because if you see somebody in a group of people and they seem to have one persona, and then them behind the scenes and they seem to have a different, that does not mean they're putting up a false front. It means that they have a persona that comes forth in social situations to help protect them, help them make them feel safe. Hey, listen, really quickly, I want to cover something because I got an email about it and I just want to cover it super quickly. I'm literally sitting in a dark room right now. I have no external lights on. I don't have my ring light on. I don't have my bounce lights on. And I know that there's a glow coming from over there. From my perspective, that corner is dark. I genuinely don't know where all this light bounce is coming from. There's no light coming in through the window or anything. But somebody had said, like, hey, you really need to turn your ring light down. It's like, my ring light hasn't been on for 2 years, my friends. So I'm just covering that super quickly. The thing is that in a healing journey, it can really mess us up as well. And one of the easiest ways, and something I think you're going to be able to relate to as well, is after we leave a toxic relationship. There can be a part of it that's like, yes, thank goodness, my self-love. I know how to, I will only accept the love that's worthy of me. And then you'll also miss the relationship sometimes because, big parts of your life are tied up into it. Many of your memories involve that person. Nobody would stay in a situation that sucked 24/7 unless they were being held captive. So there's also the variations that, like, sometimes even abusers are good and loving partners and a lot of fun to be around. And that it is not a contradiction. And that's really what is at the core of this, is understanding that it is not a contradictory thing within self, within others, or like from a different person's perspective, because I'm always dealing with people who are hoping for closure. Like, I just want closure. I want to know why they did what they did. And it's like, well, but their reason might not make sense to you. Half the time, people don't really know why they're doing things because they're not in touch with things. The biggest one that I think you'll be able to relate to as well is the concept of envy. I will get envy cards as attachment cards in readings for people all the time. And it's something I have to be very careful about as I talk to a client about it, because it feels like an accusation. Like, we have this, like, we measure ourselves, particularly women do, against this like yardstick of, am I being a good enough person? Am I being a good enough person? And envy is one of those things that we put in the only bad people do that. Hey, listen, everybody does it. Envy is not about looking at somebody and saying, you should not have what you have. How dare you? It is wondering, where's mine? Why don't I have that? When's mine gonna get here? What's the timeline for me to have my stuff? That feels like envy, and that is completely natural. It is completely natural to acknowledge that as one of our lesser aspects. When we're talking about making peace with our inner duality or inner dichotomy, it is making peace with the idea that we are not defined by our lesser aspects, that we live in conjunction and within compromise with them at all times, and that all we can ever do is continue to reach for the best version of ourselves. But if you're trying to get to some purified state in which you're completely negating or releasing the lesser aspects of you, please remember that is simply part of being a human being. And that it's very, very normal to have anger, sometimes guilt, fear, envy, all sorts of, like, I'm running out of, like, what would the other ones be? There's just so many lesser aspects that we have that we learn to coexist with and reason ourselves away from, but they're part of our, like, fundamental, or lizard brain, the most fundamental emotional response systems that we have. So what have you found to be the case with, like, people having to battle? Because you've got your own stuff, man. You're bipolar, so you should know this better than anybody.
So sorry, the doctor distracted me there for a second. Could you ask me that question
Got a
again?
circus in the background, guys.
Yeah, could you repeat that question for me? Sorry, they were
Oh, of
taking all
course.
my
I was
attention.
just asking, like, kind of what your experience with, because envy is one that you've dealt with. That, like, it's something that you deal with jealousy, and it's interesting because you're part of a polyamorous community where, like, jealousy and envy is, like, that's a really hard thing to get past. And
Yeah,
so
sure.
that would be one of the things that I'm asking about, is how does it function in your life? What are your experiences with it, and what do you see in other people that you'd like to call attention to?
I mean, yeah, if we want to use jealousy as the example, let's see. The trick that I always tell people is, like, it's not about not feeling the jealousy. It is about, like, learning how to kind of live with it and not let it kind of drive the ship, as it were. And so at the same time, I can be jealous that my partner is doing X, Y, or Z, but I can also be happy that they are having experience X, Y, or Z, right? So it's not that I have to be one or the other. Those two things can exist, at the same time and at the same level, even. Because once we just realize jealousy is just a fear of loss at the end of the day, then you can kind of start to use tools, kind of work through that, right? And so when I first got started, I always saw jealousy as a negative emotion, not just from myself, but from my partners as well. Because I was like, well, if they're being so jealous, then why is this like, why are they being so controlling? Why is this happening? And it would like be putting these negative connotations on their actions and behaviors when in fact it was just a part of this, swirling mass of emotions. So it wasn't that they were like trying to be controlling, but I just had to remember that two things can be true at once. And there was love and affection and all of that tied up into this kind of like negative connotation that I had put on the word that didn't really exist.
You're really honing in on something that's so very important is if we can release negative connotations around things, we can solve our problems and understand ourselves so much better. An example I'd like to use is a lot of people who came out of traumatic situations without meaning to. And if you're hearing this, like I need you to drop your defensiveness for just a moment. You're not being accused of anything. Something's being pointed out to you to consider in your healing journey. People who come out of traumatic situations often try to use like control, like very heavy scheduling, always knowing where their partner is. Like, are you getting in the car now? Where are you now? Like having location devices and things on people as a way of trying to feel more secure in a relationship or more secure in the world, particularly if you've had people die suddenly. I mean, that was a big one I had to get over was like, there's a lot of trauma. Remember, that's a PTSD response when I start laughing about something that is wildly not funny. I had multiple people die very suddenly and like sometimes rather violently in my childhood. And so as an adult, like I was very like worried about people going out and doing things because I had had multiple experiences with people like leaving a house and dying. And that it really ingrained in me like it's not safe out there, don't go out there and do that, stay here with me. And it was only as like and this was something that I've long outgrown, but it was only when I began to understand how limiting that was for me, how it actually exacerbated fear rather than alleviated it, because it meant that the way that I was controlling my fear or dealing with it or understanding it was in trying to exert an external force rather than an internal understanding and healing, that I really began to release it. And that to remember that from the other person's perspective, and this is just completely valid, that it's the same thing as like feeling control, being controlling is a form, it is one of the lesser forms, remember things exist on a sliding scale, of being emotionally abusive. And like that was a completely horrifying thought to me because like I came out of a terribly abusive situation. We all want to not be what we came from in those situations. And so to understand that like at a young age, I was really engaging in that. And to just let it go, to just let it go. You can either trust somebody or you can't trust somebody. Like the world, like there's no way to hide from danger. You can be like sitting in your house and a plane could fall on it. Like just learning to make peace with when you have an irrational fear, the only way to deal with it is to understand this is irrational. This is irrational, but it doesn't give me carte blanche to then behave irrationally. And to just kind of examine the ways in which you approach others if your relationships have not been working out, or if you don't have the friendships or the romantic relationships that you want, to remember you're playing a part in that. And again, it's not an accusation. It is make peace with the idea that you can be a really great person, like a really stellar person on a spiritual journey, on your way to a spiritual alignment with your divine self, and still struggling with your ego-driven fears, anger, jealousy. And jealousy can be about more than a fear of losing something. It can be about that thing, a need for control that comes with safety seeking. So it can be about just basic life fear as well. Also, it can be about a lack of self-love, because at the core of it, not believing that somebody would truly love you and continue to love you if they have other options, that kind of thing. And it is important to just like sit with that knowledge that it's like, it makes sense. It just makes sense that we do this as people. How do you run into that in your own life when you have the more than one thing can be true at once? Like, what's an example where you've seen that in yourself or in others?
Oh, Um, I like to think of myself as a relatively nice, well-adjusted person. I would like to think, but there are definitely people out there who do not have that perspective, like that perception of me, for whatever reason. And when I'm confronted with this idea that I may not be this idealized person that I think that I am, um, I really have to stop and think, like, where am I existing on the spectrum of what I believe is like my idealized self versus what the what my perceived self is. And sometimes that's a difficult, conversation to have with yourself. Because you're like, I think that I'm doing X, Y, and Z, but from the other person's perspective, this is what's happening. And I don't know, like having to wrestle with where I lie on that spectrum, and then realizing that it is a spectrum and it is not just white and black, and I'm not just, you know, I'm not a bad person just because they think that, and then trying to figure out, just where the spectrum exists. Because I feel like I personally have that problem a lot where I think that a situation is existing in one way, but I then realize, or am told later that someone did not see it the way that I saw it. And I sometimes have trouble with that, like understanding other people's perspective on my own actions, I guess. I think I went through it a lot with my ex-husband, where I was thinking that things were one way, or like the way that I was behaving, or the way that I was living was, fine or whatever. And then he would, come at me with his perspective. And there was a middle ground between the two of us, but I always had difficulty in finding it, I guess.
It's a hard thing because we have these, huh. Our self-esteem is an interesting thing because part of it is engaging in some denial about like who we are when it comes to others. And some of it is like sometimes we're too self-punishing as well. Trying to make peace with the idea that like please don't worry about what other people think of you because you will literally have no control over it. Like somebody once said that there is a different version of you in the mind of every single person you have ever met. And it's like, oh, that's daunting because I've had some days, particularly like as I was healing. And that was something I really had to make peace with is like people who knew me when I was much younger, like I must seem like I'm from a completely different planet or like I assumed that person's identity because I'm really, really different. But I was also incredibly damaged and that I literally, from like a psychological structure standpoint, had no chance of being anything other. That like it was that much trauma that it's like, well, just be glad that you don't have a giant personality disorder or like something that causes me to be like completely incapable of empathy. That it was a we all have rough stages and don't invest in a prior version of yourself. Let that go. Let the idea go that other people, what they think of you is determines how you should think of yourself. But here's where the duality and the dichotomy and the living with the contradictions that we have to figure out that balance in is, but if it doesn't matter what other people think of us, then where is our obligation to treat others in a way that like we wish to be treated? And it's always there because it's not about how another person will perceive you. It's about how you will perceive yourself. And the whole thing about do you still do the right thing when no one is watching being one of the standards for like what's your real character. And if you find a character flaw
Mm.
that you're not super fond of, it's like you work on it. Like I will always go back to this. I have within me big absolutely everything. And the thing that I like the least about myself is the fact that I can have an incredibly bad temper. It does not last long, but when
Oh
it
my
goes
God.
off, holy mother of God, I have to be so careful with like staying in touch with am I getting angry? I need to talk myself through this. And it is not because like people are unsafe around me. It is simply that it's something that feels awful. And it is something that I had to make a lot of peace with, that that's the price that I pay for having big energies in other areas, like being able to be really happy, being able to be incredibly creative, being able to do everything else in a big capacity, to have drive, to have the ability to keep pushing, to keep improving on things and hang my butt out there. Those are all related to my incredibly bum temper because everything exists in that same balancing energy. And the struggle of like, but how do you continue to practice self-love when you bump into the parts of yourself you really don't like? And what a lot of people do is they try and close a door on it and pretend it didn't happen. They won't look at it. They can't examine it. They don't understand what caused it. They can't love that part of themselves in equal measure to the parts that they like. And it isn't about loving it in a case of like, I approve, I validate this part of myself. It's rather accepting that is a part of me that I need to understand so that it doesn't get out of the china shop and break everything and like lay waste to the land. That like I have to love it in a way that accepts it rather than approves of it. And that is like an incredibly important thing on our journey in spiritual healing and self-love, is to understand that love is not the same thing as approval. That you can still love somebody and not validate some of their lesser aspects, and you can still love yourself without saying, I'm keeping that lesser aspect of myself, I'm working with it. Everything improves more when treated with compassion and understanding. Almost nothing can be shamed out of us. And so that is the part of accepting that it's like, hey, listen, you might be the greatest person in the world, but you know what you think sometimes, and don't like the parts of yourself that you're like, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. Understand it's a completely natural part of you. And that is to not let it run rampant, but to understand that it is not something to greet with shame. It's not a part of you that is betraying you. It is actually, it speaks very, very well of people who have these lesser aspects, but they choose the higher road. That they're like, yeah, everybody has that. Everybody has the greedy, grasping, get it energy in a world that is about survival, because that's where that is born. That need to have more and more and more is based in a fear of survival. Almost all of our crappy stuff is based in fear, quite frankly, fear versus the energy of love and acceptance and compassion. And again, forgetting that love is not about approval. Love is about compassion, and love is about extending that as well. So like what parts of yourself do you work with, Jacob, that you're just like, yeah, I just kind of had to learn to work with that part of me?
I mean, we use our jealousy example always. But like you, I have that temper that is kind of volatile. Like there was a perspective that I was given whenever it came at work one night, and one of my employees had to have a talk with me. This was years ago, and it was because I normally I'm very even kiltered. Things are fine. Like we're not here to save lives. We're just here to serve food. So like we're trying to keep that kind of mentality going. But there was one night where that was just not the case for me, and I was just having the worst kind of time, and I blew up. I was in the kitchen and I was like hollering and doing all this stuff, and like went outside and ended up like punching the dumpster out back, right? And so I'm, for perspective for everyone who can't see me, is 6'4", almost 300 pounds. Like I'm kind of a big guy. And so it's frightening when somebody who is my size is like going on a rampage like that, right? Especially, when there's like, younger females that, work there. It's a terrible, terrible look, right? And whenever I was giving this talk, it was embarrassing, it was upsetting, because that's not how I perceive myself, and that's certainly not how I want to be perceived. But that is, I guess, an aspect of myself that I consciously have to keep an eye on all the time. And ever since then, I've been much better about it. I mean, still, I don't get as, needlessly violent like that anymore. But like you said, every time I, start to feel that, I have to kind of do my checklist, right? Because I don't want to be perceived that way. I think that I'm the gentle giant in the room, and I never want someone to feel like they're unsafe or that they have to be afraid of me. That's a really big one. It happened. I think I've told you a story about an incident when I was married. And that's always been my constant struggle, is keeping, emotional volatility in check more than it.
That makes perfect sense to me as well. I met a man a long time ago, like it was seriously a long time ago. I want to say like 20 years ago. Who was, everybody loved him. He owned a bookstore. He was the nicest guy. And when like talking to him about what a nice guy he was, he's like, yeah, it kind of sucks, because the moment that I show fallibility, the moment that I have less than the patience of a saint, the moment that like people feel betrayed. Whereas if you meet somebody and they're just a jerk, and then out of nowhere they're pretty nice, it's a nice surprise. when I show that I too have feet of clay, that people are genuinely disappointed to find out that I'm not 100% just this incredibly nice person. And this is, again, accepting the fact that you contain parts of yourself. Just if you learn to accept that part without shame, without thinking I can make it go away, rather than learning how to work in a good partnership with it. It really makes things a lot easier. And I'm going to point out one to you that, like, we've talked a lot about, because we both have struggled with it in our lives, is the fact that we're both really dedicated to healing, and we're both really dedicated to trying to be the best version of ourselves and to help other
Uh,
people. But, but
incredibly broken on my end.
and we both struggle with a tendency towards self-sabotage and self-destruction. And like the form that mine takes is like extreme commitment to things. Is that like I've been being asked over and over again to abandon all forms of like habitual behaviors. Like it's like, I was talking to you the other day, it's like I've decided I'm going to institute a rule that I'm not going to touch cards on the days that I'm not working. And I realized that was a problem too, that it's like, well, why don't you do it when you need to, rather than having it as a habit where something is excluded or something is done, but rather that it is a flexible and a fluid thing, because that's what I need to move towards, is to be in flow. You have to allow your habits to be more fluid, and that like routines are one of the enemies. And not that long ago, I was like, hey, I'm not getting enough out of the exercise that I'm doing, which included doing things like literally running up and down stairs to try and get good cardio in. And I was like, okay, I'll start hiking, because there's like all these incredibly, steep hills around here. And immediately I was pressing myself to do more and more and more and more, because I'm already fit. I was like, I can go from beginner to practically an expert in like 0 to 60. And that's my problem. That's my problem, is like moderation. I have to learn moderation in all things. Is that I commit too much of my energy to almost everything I do, whether it's relationships, whether it's work, whether it's like, it can be anything, is that I get hyper focus, and it is a rigid structure that I always, and it will eventually trap me. And that is what I'm always trying to get to my clients to understand as well. Your routines are not your friends. If you do not like change, that's the thing to heal. That's the thing to heal, because that is the thing that will allow more to come to you, for you to grow, for you to heal. In order for things to get better, things have to change. Make change your friend and be okay with it. And then, just also like we've talked about it, just the idea that you can be aware of, like, I'm doing something that's not great for me, and yet sometimes I have trouble stopping myself from doing that, because OCD contains at its roots, because I have OCD, compulsion.
Yeah.
And learning to recognize it and learning how to react to it, which in my case, I talk to it like it's a bad dog. No, no, down, no more. And that's what works for me. Well, do you know what I'm talking about, Jacob? Because like we know each other fairly well.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I wish that I had that issue. No, because as you well know, mine is always uh, drugs and alcohol. So it's like trying to, and sometimes I have that struggle as well. Is just like, I don't want to, like I said before, I don't want to be perceived as a bad person, but then I do these things that are indicative of being a bad person societally based, like being an alcoholic or using drugs or whatever. It puts a negative connotation on you as a person, right? And
Value
so
judgment. Yeah.
a value judgment, yes, exactly. And it's like, so I mean, I still feel like I'm a good person, even though I have done those things or do those things or whatever. But yeah, that's always been my struggle. Like, I wish mine was routines or climbing mountains or something, but no, mine's
Oh,
just
well, I,
self-sabotage and self-destruction, and it's just like, and things can be going super well. Like you and I just had a talk, like what, last week, 2 weeks ago, things are finally going super well. And then now is the time that I'm having my, I don't know, dark night of the soul or whatever, or it's
Mhm.
like now everything is back again, like all these temptations and all these, slippery slopes have, put themselves right in my path. And it's been a struggle, obviously, but yeah, balancing that, who I am versus the perception of others. And it's just been a couple of weeks.
The impulse to do something that is not in your best interest is what we're talking about. And it is the same thing. And please remember, when I was younger, I struggled with substance abuse as well. Like, am I an addict? I do not appear to be an addict. I can stop anything. I really can. And like not think of it again. It's a little bit freaky. But I do struggle with compulsivity and overcommitment of an energy to whatever course of action I might be pursuing. And so it's the same thing. It's just as I like have been more and more committed to being a healthier and healthier person, it has a tendency to like, hey, hiking is great. Hiking is good for you. If you're like getting up in the morning and making weird sounds because everything hurts, maybe back off a little bit. I had to learn moderation. And you struggle with a mood disorder and things going back and forth very easily. And so what you're really struggling is with moderating your own behavior as well. And then what we talked about like just a few minutes ago was the idea that at the root of most things is fear. And you have gotten like after like I've known you for a while, dude, and like it's been a ride for you, and I know that part. And now like the road is getting a little bit smoother, and like things, all the hard work that you put into fixing stuff is coming together. And right on schedule, you started struggling with it's a trauma response, guys, when I laugh, it genuinely is because I just heard myself do it. I'm sorry. You started struggling with the desire to self-destruct, to like
Yeah.
not be on your own team, to bring the bad towards you because you know how to handle that more than you know how to handle your life going well. And
Yeah.
that's the more than
That's
one
fair.
thing can be true at once. We go towards the
Yeah.
now.
Like wanting, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I guess wanting to be that better person and wanting to live that life that is more put together and happy, but never having fully experienced it. Like, what do I do with all this happiness? Like, that's weird. And like, how am I supposed to carry this with me? I'm used to, more being judged and like having things go wrong and struggle. When you first said that to me, I was like, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. Why would I not want to be happy? But there's obviously that truth to it because you've seen a couple of times where things started to even out in my life over the past couple of years, and then it all just comes crashing down again. And I mean, obviously it's through my own fault, but at the same time, I'm always just like, but why am I
Why'd I do that?
sabotaging myself so hard? Like, I know that that's not what I should have been doing. Why did I fall into it so easily? Why do I never learn my lessons? Blah, blah, blah. I'm always going to be, the black sheep of the family, or I'm always going to be this or that. And that self-defeating kind of loop that you start to run off of after you start feeding it a little bit.
Well, and like that's the internal perspective, and the external perspective is something really important to keep in mind because you're not the only person who struggles with that. Obviously, is like we all have a tendency to be a little self-defeating, and why would you do that? It's like why do I do that? Why am I sometimes my own worst enemy? Because at the very root of it, like it's thinking that you don't really deserve a good life, and so there are ways in which you might take it away from yourself, but it's beyond that. It's not just about not understanding what you deserve. It's about believing that the past predicts the future, and that like that is the energy that I understand. I know that is the land to which I have the closest roadmap. This is where I walk the easiest. And I do not have to deal with the idea that people could be disappointed in me if I make a mistake. So if I go ahead and make the mistake, I will not be waiting for me to screw it up. I will not worry about other people watching me and waiting for me to screw it up. I will not have to deal with my judgment or the judgment of others. And so you go from, it's 0 to 60, you go from one point and things are working pretty well to what is the thing that I could do to mess up my entire trajectory as a part of this is the energy that I understand. This is the energy where I can make things work and I don't have to worry about achievement or sustaining a particular level or meeting all responsibilities or all of the ways in which I don't really have a lot of faith in myself. So why didn't I just go from 0 to 60 to the point in which it's all gonna come crashing down anyway? And it's that self-defeating thing that a lot of it is a trauma response quite frequently. It is about if you were mistreated as a child in particular, there is a part of you that will always struggle to think, I deserve good things, I deserve love, I deserve to keep the good things that I've worked so hard to bring into my life. it is really at the very core of it, self-love is so deeply involved in the ways in which we self-sabotage. And yet, this is where the whole dichotomy duality thing comes in. You can be telling that to somebody, you're like, no, I've put in so much work. I love me. I do. I know I deserve. Like, you can really fight off the idea that it has something to do with what you think you do or do not deserve. As being like, I already did that work. But as we were always talking about, it's not a linear journey. And when you reach oh, this is a better life. This is good. This is someone's going to take it away from me. I do not trust happiness. I don't trust it. And the idea of retention of things also exacerbates anxiety and fear. And we have a tendency to have the worst impulse control, as you outlined with the situation at your work, which restaurant work, I've been in it. Oh my God, in the weeds, it can be terrible. It has a lot of stress involved with it. There was anxiety, there was frustration, being asked to do too much at once, trying to meet the expectations of too many people, caused you to have a part of you came out that you're like, I'm not in control of that part of myself right now. And it was because of all of those external factors. And it's a weird thing because we can recognize it when it's negative, but we have a much harder time recognizing and working with it when it's positive. Unknown lands and not liking change is part of what goes into that, because we have it tattooed into our souls that change is bad. Change is bad. If you can't keep the good thing that you have, it's not worth having. It's like, but you have it while it's there. And some things will be transient and some things will go wrong. And you don't have to rush to the things going wrong, because the good period, you become more and more anxious that it's going to end. The longer it goes on, it's like it could be a safe from the sky. It could be a sinkhole opening up in front of me. Or yeah, exactly right. It's that. It's the tension. It's the tension that goes along with if you've been in survival mode almost your entire life, to relieve the tension of what direction is it going to come from, you bring it from inside. The call is coming from inside the house. You can't help but do it to yourself. And the only thing that saves you from that is awareness. And like, we talked a little bit about it while you were struggling. And it was like the thing that to always remember is like, whatever you're doing won't stay fun for long. And then you will have regret because you worked real hard. So like, just kind of touching, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. Like, as you were talking, I was sitting here thinking about my current relationship, and that's kind of where, while you were talking, that's all I could think about, because the thing that you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago would be the one thing that could potentially take all of that away. And so I'm having this this struggle with myself where I'm like, well, if you cognitively know that this situation could take this really good thing away from you, why are you even considering entering back into that situation? Does it make any sense? And then like I look back on other relationships, and if things are starting to go too well, and so now I'm just set myself up to self-sabotage because, well, it's going too well now. Something bad is going to happen and take it away from me. Why don't I be the one that goes ahead and takes it away, instead of letting someone else or something else do it? I don't know.
It's also part of we repeat it until we repair it. And that repairing it is like, it's an almost deceptive word, because repairing it like kind of implies that we're done now. But if you have essentially a vulnerability within you, like you kind of have to accept, and I have to kind of accept, and people who are trying to heal have to accept, particularly if you've struggled with self-destructive impulses, is that it's something that you will be working in conjunction with, because it is a part of you, because it's been there for a long time. And that, why would you do that? It is because it's the energy that you know. It's the energy that you know. It's the only way you really know how to live your life. And so there is fear attached to but then something could take it away. And that's what we work from, a place of fear in almost everything that we do. If you are engaging in behaviors you don't understand, we're talking about accepting inner dichotomy, and that is something that you just have to understand about yourself. You can have these seriously diametrically opposed impulses within you, And it doesn't mean you're not doing something right. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. We all genuinely have this like icky thing within that we are all struggling with to try and overcome. Most of it is formed in trauma and damage. It's our shadow side. It's learning to live with the light and the dark balance that we all exist in. And it's meant to be in balance. If you want things to improve, you go more towards the light aspects. You go towards improving yourself, improving the world around you, and trusting in yourself to, even if you have a setback, to be able to start again. Because that's the thing that most people lose sight of. And again, in that more than one thing can be true at once, is that a setback does not mean you start over. It doesn't mean that everything, I had a setback, I lost my temper, I did the thing that I wasn't supposed to. It's like, I'm starting from ground zero, it's rock bottom, I fell off the wagon. That's not really what it means. It means that you, first of all, stop the behavior or stop the situation that is somehow damaging to you because you don't deserve to be damaged. That's the act of self-love, where it's like, well, I don't understand why I'm doing this yet, but I do know that I shouldn't be, so I'm going to stop doing everything until I understand this. And then you just kind of have to talk yourself through it as to, like, what am I actually really afraid of? What's going on here? Why would I do anything why am I acting like my best friend here? Why am I acting like my own worst enemy? And to understand that that's always just going to be a part of you. That it's about a new lesson about how to cope. That the universe will bring us more and more so that we can handle more and more. And you're dealing with how do you handle more joy, more blessings, more security, more stability, more fruits of your labor. And, part of you is like by eating the poisoned apple, the one clearly marked poisoned apple, because that's what you have known your whole life. And it is partially a repeating signature. And that only we can choose to do what's right for ourselves. Like when I was talking about, jumping up and down mountains, only I could stop myself on the day that I woke up and I'm like, I'm gonna go for the 9-mile hike. And I was like, maybe you should sit your butt down and rest. You're allowed, it's not lazy to rest. Like I had to go through this entire dialogue with myself on it. And that was like a big part of self-care, was learning how to talk to myself appropriately. And it might have looked a little bit weird to other people, but it totally works for me. And it doesn't mean I walk around talking to myself. It just means that I had to learn how to talk to myself as if that lesser aspect, that darker aspect, was somebody I was sitting beside rather than inhabiting the same body with. Like, rather like, what are you doing? Let's maybe not do this. Have a drink, have something like something non-alcoholic. I don't drink. Have a drink, have something to eat. Like, get yourself into a calm place, go and meditate, breathe in, out, take a good warm shower, whatever it's going to take to make yourself feel more comfortable. And then figure out what in the world you are doing that you're always trying to chase something. And that is what, when I'm overcommitting my energy, that is the energy that I'm always trying to go forward, always trying to go forward, always trying to go forward, not appreciating the present moment. And the only thing that made that possible to confront was to understand that part of me that is compulsive, the OCD part, is from damage. It is from emotional and traumatic injuries that, like, I don't describe the stuff too much because it upsets other people and I don't want to do that. I don't want to trigger anybody else. But I know it comes from a valid place. And so just accepting that it's like, it's not weakness, it's not illness, it's not, being just a screw up. It is that it is at the very core part of it. The first way I was ever taught to approach myself was that I was never good enough. And so sometimes I have a tendency to treat myself when I'm going towards something in achieve more, do more, do more, do more, do more until I'm effing exhausted. And that if I don't catch it, then it spins out of control. And that what I really need to do is to not do anything habitually, because it's a problem land for me. I don't have to be an addict for habits to be something that are limiting and trap me eventually over time. And only that awareness is, like, you're the only person that can find that awareness. I talked to a client not that long ago, who was like, she was aware that she had anxiety disorder and OCD. And as I was pointing a couple of things out to her, she's like, yes, I'm aware I do that. I'm aware I do that. And I'm like, okay, so the awareness is only part of it. If you're aware of it, that's great, but what are you doing to counteract it? What are you doing to do something differently? The awareness gives you the information of what it is you're trying to change. It doesn't stand in for the need to change. It is part of the equation. It is not the actual sum total. And like it
Mhm.
was very clearly like a new thought to her, like, wait, what? And it was like, yeah, no, like I have an anxiety disorder too. It does actually mean that things will be more difficult for me in very particular ways, but it's not a reason I shouldn't be doing things. It's a way of understanding how I need to do things. And just like you struggle with some stuff as well. And Jacob, like honest to goodness, you know that part already, and you have some training in psychology and you see a therapist as well. And how has that process helped you with some of this stuff? Because you are struggling with it and it's completely normal to struggle with it.
I mean, right now I'm still like I basically had to restart therapy almost is what it feels like. Since we changed the model that we're using for my treatment or whatever. So I haven't gotten too deep into like how I'm dealing with that in this new model per se.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, it's like it's weird because you were just talking about it's like I can be aware of all these things, and that's like the first step is awareness. But what are you doing to change it? Like I can take my meds, I can go see my therapist, but if I'm not utilizing the tools that I'm given, if I'm not putting forth any effort into it, then like, nothing's going to change. Like the pills are not going to make everything, you know, hunky dory on their own. So yeah, I need to work on finding new techniques for, I think for me personally, it's going to be techniques for self-evaluation. So I've started journaling again and I hate it because it's something I don't hate it. I want to do it, but it's just like
Mhm.
laborious sitting down and writing things down by hand. We're in a digital world now, and it feels just like meh. um, but for me, it's about right now. It's self-evaluation, especially since the struggles that I'm going through currently about staying away from certain aspects of myself in order to keep the relationship that I'm going, which is contributing to very positive aspects of myself. Um, and I guess it's trying to pinpoint, like, where the emotion is coming from, why I'm feeling like I need to do, X, Y, and Z, even though they may be destructive, or, let me rephrase that, even though they are destructive, not just to myself, but to my relationships and my entire world. Um, and then kind of dealing with that, like, here's the stressor. How can we, kind of mitigate it? Because we'll never get rid of it, but how can we mitigate it so that it is not going to cause the speed bump that puts my car in the ditch.
Yeah, exactly. And then everything that we're talking about, how you can like learn to coexist with this weird duality, when you're trying to understand why somebody else has done something, please remember that kind of like that basement dweller part, the shadow self, the shadow aspect, the ego-driven part exists in another person as well. And when we really get down to, because what you and I are talking about right now is how difficult it can be to understand ourselves even when
Yeah.
we have awareness, even when we've been learning things. And to accept that as part of it. It's like sometimes I do not understand me, but I know how to work with me. I can get really impatient with, well, why aren't I over that part already? And it's like, well, because it caused like from the day you were born, it was like something was damaging you in a very, very deep way. And I ended up with like multiple disorders from it, but none of them require medication. It's like I got lucky because like everything that happened to me can cause these very high level dysfunctional disorders, and I got them at the lowest level possible so that I can manage them through like just self understanding and the appropriate amounts of food and exercise and being honest with myself about the things that I need to change as well. But that when we're confused about why somebody else does something, please understand they may not have done that work, that things might look different from where they sit, that they too are dealing with their own, the decades of crap that we all accumulate as we become adults. Because when we're talking about your relationship and it's like, well, why in the world would I like sabotage myself in any way? It's because we work best with what is known, and that it takes a lot of courage to go towards being an entirely new version of ourselves. And it does encompass the idea of accepting that like parts of me suck. And it doesn't mean that I'm not lovable. It just means that I need to learn how to take care of the parts of me that suck so that they don't make my life suck. So that I can deal with them again, like it's a cranky toddler part of myself, that it's like, what is the need I must meet for myself to make sure that I'm not engaging in these things that will harm me or the life that I've tried to put together, or the people around me. And then like just learning to let go of the idea that we can have a great deal of understanding about anything other than our own perspective is something that's also freeing, because what I often see is like people have a hard time letting go of things from the past because they're trying to understand the other person. It's like, stop trying to understand the other person and understand yourself, and then you'll be able to let go. And that is another thing, is that like understanding that even though we're talking about the duality, the dichotomy, the like more than one thing can be true at once from an external perspective, is that understanding ultimately the path to working with these things, to getting the best outcomes that we can, to living the best and the most productive lives that we possibly can, come from personal accountability and understanding that do your own work first and don't worry about others. If you're waiting for closure, work on yourself. If you're waiting for closure on something, please just work on yourself, because it will stop being important to you. Because once you're in a healed state, you let the stuff that other people have done go far more easily. So that's the worth of the work. I hope this has been helpful for people, because it's a really, we can confuse ourselves. You know, what do you do with yourself when you're being, you know, confusing even to you? It's like kind of the stop, drop, and roll of self-care is like, first of all, stop. Try to understand it. If you can't understand it, take care of it like it's maybe a sick kid who needs some chicken soup and a big glass of water, and then try to work it through and to let go of the defensiveness that we all have around this part of ourselves, because we're taught to approach ourselves with shame, and nothing flourishes or grows from that. The only thing that will help is being able to shine a light in there and go like, well, what am I really doing here? What's this about? And that it's okay to have parts of yourself that aren't your favorite part. It doesn't make you unlikable. It just gives you an idea of what you're working with to get your best outcomes. So that was Logical Magic, examining esoterica this time, guys. If you need to find me, I'm at therisingmoon.com for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session where I can help you identify the things that you need to work on. As a for instance, I have a Patreon that can help you with that as well, because it gives a lot of insight into shadow work, that people in a collective have similar energy. You can find me here at Logical Magic as well. And then Jacob is Southern Style Readings on Facebook. And then he is also Southern Style Readings at gmail.com. He's a very insightful reader. And understand that like it's great to have tarot tell you what's going to happen. But if you want to make different things in your life happen, you have to understand yourself first. And part of that is about making peace with your own inner dichotomy. Take care, be well, and live magically.